I lost no time in telling my mother everything I knew.
I'm sorry,
I said.
I should have told you what was happening a long time ago. Now we're in danger.
My mother sighed and, as always, was worried only about our financial situation.
Well, the captain owes us quite a bit of money. But I don't think any of his seedy old shipmates will pay his debts.
The captain wanted me to go tell Dr. Livesey in the event of his death, but I can't leave you here alone and unprotected,
I said. Mother shivered.
Oh, I don't think either of us can stay here,
she said.
From the crackling of the fire to the ticking of the clock, every creak and rattle in this old house is making me nervous.
With that dead body on the floor and the thought that the blind man's friends might show up, I'm really jumpy too,
I said.
We must get out of here,
said Mother. I agreed.
We'll ask for help in the village.
We rushed out into the frosty, foggy evening, and by the time we reached the village, it was dark. The windows of the general store shone with cheerful candlelight, so we went in. Soon, a crowd of men were listening to our story with great concern, but no one wanted to go to the Admiral Benbow.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Hawkins,
said Mrs. Crossley, the shopkeeper.
Captain Flint's men are too dangerous.
We might find someone to ride in the opposite direction of Dr. Livesey's,
one man said.
But no one in his right mind would dare help you defend the inn.
I will not,
Mother declared,
lose money that belongs to my fatherless boy. If none of you cowards want to help, then Jim and I will go back alone. We'll open that sea chest, even if we have to die doing it. Mrs. Crossley, could I at least have a bag to put our money in?
I'll ride to the doctor's for help,
one lad volunteered. Another villager handed me a loaded pistol.
In case you're attacked,
he said. So, my mother and I went back to the inn, slipping along the hedges, noiseless and swift. Finally, the door closed behind us. I bolted the lock, and my mother got a candle. Holding hands, we went over to where the captain lay on his back. His eyes were open, and one arm was extended.
We must get the key to the sea chest off that body,
she said.
Oh, I don't even want to touch it.
She let out a sob. I knelt down next to the captain, and close to his hand was a paper that was blackened on one side.
This must be the black spot,
I said. On the other side of the paper, in clear handwriting, was a message.
You have until 10 tonight,
I read. Just then, our old clock began to strike, and my mother and I jumped at the sound. We calmed down when we looked at the clock, and I sighed.
It's only 6 o'clock. They won't be here for 4 hours yet.
Now, Jim,
Mother said,
find the key.
I searched all the captain's pockets but couldn't find it.
Perhaps it's around his neck,
she suggested. Overcoming a strong disgust, I tore open his shirt. There, on a black string, was the key. I pulled the string over his head, and we hurried up to the captain's room. We found his sea chest against the wall, where it had stood from the day he had first arrived.
Give me the key,
said Mother, and after a few tries, she turned the stiff lock and opened the lid. On top was a suit of clothes, carefully brushed and folded.
This suit has never been worn,
Mother said, astonished. Under that were some worthless trinkets, a tobacco pouch, 2 brass compasses, a quadrant, and 6 curious seashells. Impatiently, Mother pulled out an old sea cloak, and underneath was a small bundle of papers and a canvas bag of coins that jingled like gold.
I'm an honest woman,
Mother said.
I'll take what he owes me and no more. Hold open Mrs. Crossley's bag, Jim.
She pulled out a handful of coins and began to count them into the bag. Suddenly, I heard a familiar sound, the tap, tap, tapping of the blind man's stick on the frozen road outside, and I put my hand on Mother's arm.
Listen,
I whispered. The sound drew nearer and nearer, and we held our breath as the bolt rattled on the door.
That horrible man is trying to get in,
I whispered again. Then there was a long silence. At last, the tapping began anew, and to our indescribable joy, slowly died away.
Mother,
I said,
take the whole thing and let's go.
I won't take more than I'm owed,
she said.
but I won't be content with less. Besides, it's not even 7 yet.
Then we heard a low whistle a way off, as if a signal was being sent. That was enough for both of us.
I'll take what I have,
she said, jumping to her feet. I grabbed the bundle of papers too. Then we opened the door and ran out into the moonlight. The fog was rapidly dispersing and wouldn't hide us for long. Behind us, we heard several running footsteps and saw a lantern coming toward us.
My dear,
Mother gasped breathlessly.
take the money and run. I think I'm going to faint.
She sighed and collapsed with her head on my shoulder. We were by a little bridge, so I dragged her under it. I couldn't move her any farther, so there we stayed, within earshot of the inn. My curiosity was stronger than my fear, so I crept back toward the inn, hid behind a bush, and watched as my enemies began to arrive. 5 of them ran along the road, with a man holding a lantern in front. Right behind them were 3 men, hand in hand. The man in the middle was blind.
Knock down the door!
The blind man cried.
Aye, aye, sir!
2 men answered, and then they ran at the door. I saw them pause in confusion and surprise when they discovered that the door was open. Then the blind man shouted,
Go in, in!
He cursed at the men for their delay. 5 of them obeyed at once, while 2 stayed in the road with the blind man. There was a cry of surprise, and then someone shouted from the house,
Bill's dead!
The blind man swore again.
Search him, and then get the chest!
I could hear their feet rattling up our stairs. They made the whole house shake. The window of the captain's room was thrown open with a slam and a jingle of broken glass. A man leaned out into the moonlight and addressed the blind man on the road below.
Pew!
He cried.
Someone got here first! The chest is open!
Did you find them?
Roared Pew, the blind man.
Some money's there!
I don't care about the money, you swab!
Cursed Pew.
Flint's secret papers, I mean!
We don't see anything that looks like that,
The man replied.
You, below there! Are the papers on Bill?
Pew cried to the men on the first floor. At that, another fellow came to the door of the inn. Bill's been searched already, he said. Nothing's left.
It's those inn people. It's that boy. I wish I'd put his eyes out!
Pew cried.
They can't be far. Scatter, lads! Find them!
Heavy feet pounded to and fro, and the men toppled furniture over and kicked in the doors of every room. Then the men came out again, one after another, onto the road.
They aren't here!
One announced. The whistle that had frightened my mother and me earlier sounded 2 times. Then I had thought it was Pew calling his men to assault us. But now I realized it was a warning signal from a lookout hiding somewhere near the village. There's the signal, a man said. That means the law is coming. Let's go!
You dogs, you're so close!
Cried Pew.
Scatter and look for Bill's secret. Oh, if I only had eyes.
At Pew's urging, 2 fellows began to look here and there, but half-heartedly, with an eye to their own danger all the time. The rest stood on the road, unsure what to do.
You could be as rich as kings, you fools!
Pew shouted.
But you're just standing around! I'll end up a poor beggar when I could be riding in a fine coach! If you had any guts, you'd catch that boy!
Forget it, Pew. We've got the money,
Grumbled one man.
The boy and his parents might have hid the papers.
Another said.
Take the money, Pew, and don't stand here squawking.
Pew struck blindly at his men right and left, with his stick hitting a few of them. They, in turn, cursed at the sightless villain and tried in vain to catch the stick and take it from him. Their quarrel saved my mother and me, for while it was raging there was another sound. Horses galloping. The pirates heard it too. They turned and ran, separating in every direction, so that in half a minute no one remained but Pew. He tapped up and down the road in a frenzy, groping and calling. Finally, he took a wrong turn and ran a few steps past me, crying,
Alan! Tom! Job!
And other names.
Don't leave old Pew! Mates, not old Pew!
The noise of the horses grew louder, and 5 riders swept down the road at a full gallop. Pew screamed and ran straight into a ditch, but he was on his feet again in a second and made another dash, now utterly bewildered, right into the path of the nearest horse. The rider tried to stop, but Pew went down with a terrible cry. The 4 hoofs trampled him as he fell on his side and then collapsed face down, moving no more. As the riders pulled up, I leaped to my feet, horrified at the accident. A lad from the village was trailing behind the horsemen.
These men are military officers,
he told me.
I met them and recruited them to help on my way to Dr. Livesey's.
Pew was dead, and his crew had fled back to their ship, chased by the horsemen. As for my mother, we carried her to the village, and cold water and smelling salts soon had her back to normal. When I finally returned to the Admiral Benbow with Captain Dance, one of the officers, I saw that the house was completely wrecked.
We are ruined!
I cried, looking at the result of the pirates' furious hunt. Captain Dance was sympathetic.
What were they after? Money?
No, sir, not money.
I replied.
I believe I have what they were looking for in my breast pocket. I'd like to show it to Dr. Livesey.
Well, I have to ride there and report what happened back to him and the squire,
he said cheerily as he mounted his horse.
So come along, Hawkins.
Thank you, sir,
I said as he offered his hand and then pulled me up behind him in the saddle. Captain Dance and I rode hard until we drew up before Dr. Livesey's door. The house was dark, but I jumped down and knocked anyway. A maid opened the door.
Is Dr. Livesey home?
I asked.
No, he's dining at Squire Trelawney's house,
she said.
So much the better,
said the captain.
We'll find them both at one location.
The distance was short, so I ran alongside the horse up the moonlit avenue to the gleaming white buildings and grand old gardens. Here, Captain Dance dismounted, and the squire's servant led us into the library. Squire Trelawney and Dr. Livesey sat on either side of a bright fire smoking their pipes. I'd never seen the squire up close before. Over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, he had a friendly face, reddened and lined from his long travels. The natural movement of his very black eyebrows gave him a look of a quick but not a bad temper.
Come in,
he said, sounding very stately and condescending.
Good evening, Dance,
the doctor said with a nod.
And good evening to you, Jim. What brings you here?
Captain Dance told his story, and the 2 gentlemen leaned forward, forgetting to smoke in their surprise and interest. Squire Trelawney rose and started to pace, and the doctor, as if to hear better, took off his powdered wig and sat there, looking odd with his close-cropped black hair. When they heard how my mother had bravely gone back to the inn, Dr. Livesey slapped his thigh, and Trelawney cried,
Bravo! And that's the whole story,
Captain Dance said at last.
Trampling that wicked scoundrel was an act of virtue,
the squire said.
Like stamping on a cockroach.
Do you have what they were after, Jim?
The doctor asked.
Here it is, sir.
I gave him the bundle of papers. The doctor looked excited, as if his fingers were itching to open the bundle right away, but he put it quietly in his coat pocket instead.
Thank you again, Captain Dance,
the squire said.
Jim can sleep here tonight. Dance, you are dismissed.
The captain bowed and left the room, and I sat down at a side table to eat a pigeon pie a maid had brought me.
Have you heard of this Flint?
The doctor asked the squire.
Have I heard of him?
The squire cried.
Flint was the most bloodthirsty pirate that ever sailed.
Suppose I have here in my coat pocket some clue as to where Flint buried his treasure,
said the doctor.
How much treasure do you think might be involved?
If we had a clue like that,
Trelawney cried,
I'd hire a ship to take us there immediately, and I'd have that treasure in a year.
The doctor took out the papers and said,
If Jim agrees, let's open this.
I nodded and got up from the side table as the doctor opened the bundle. Inside was a book and a sealed paper.
First, let's inspect the book,
the doctor said. The squire and I peered over the doctor's shoulder, and we saw that the first 10 pages were filled with a curious series of entries. At one end of each line was a date, and at the other end a sum of money. Between the two were a varying number of crosses.
I don't understand it,
Dr. Livesey said.
It's an account book,
Trelawney cried.
The crosses stand for ships or towns that they sank or plundered, and the sums are the scoundrel's share. God help the poor souls who cross paths with Flint.
And look,
the doctor said,
the amounts increase as the years pass.
As he rose in the ranks of pirates, his share got bigger,
explained Trelawney. Then the squire noticed something else in the book.
Look, Flint even had a table to figure out the different values of foreign coins.
Oh, no one was going to cheat him,
laughed the doctor.
And now,
Trelawney said,
for the other item.
The doctor carefully opened the sealed paper, and a map of an island fell out, with latitude and longitude and every inlet, hill, and bay marked. Everything that would be needed to safely anchor a ship upon its shores. 9 miles long and 5 across, the island had 2 landlocked harbors and a hill marked the Spyglass. Below a red cross, in small, neat handwriting, "Bulk of treasure here" was written. And on the back of the map, these notes. Tall tree, spyglass shoulder bearing north of north-northeast, skeleton island, east-southeast and by east, 10 feet. The bar silver is in the north cache by the east hill, 10 fathoms south of Black Crag with a face on it. The arms are in the Sand Hill, north, point of North Inlet Cape, bearing east and a quarter north, J.F.
It's incomprehensible to me,
I said, as the squire and Dr. Livesey laughed.
I'll start for Bristol tomorrow,
Trelawney said.
We'll have the best ship and crew in England, and Hawkins will be our cabin boy. Livesey will be ship's doctor, I'll be the admiral, and we'll take my men Tom Redruth, Richard Joyce, and John Hunter. We'll have no trouble finding the spot, and we'll have plenty of money to enjoy forever after.
I'll go,
the doctor said,
and Jim will be a credit to the undertaking, but there's only one man I'm afraid of.
Who's that?
Trelawney cried.
Name him, sir.
You,
the doctor said.
You can't hold your tongue. We're not the only men who want that money. The pirates who attacked the inn tonight are bold and desperate men, and they're not far off. We must not breathe a word of what we found.
I'll be as silent as the grave.